watching Morning at NTV.
Hello there, happy Friday, good morning, welcome back to Morning at NTV. My name is Mala Kivela Odera. Now, of course, being a Friday, we were hearing your cries. You really wanted us to talk about COSASE, the COSASE probe. Of course, you've been seeing it here on NTV every single day. We try as much as possible to loop you in to the developments of this particular probe. So we stream live these proceedings. And so in studios today, we're going to just unravel that and look at the effects of the unearthing, the information that we're getting from this particular probe and how that affects the economy and breaking it down to how it affects you and I. Now in studios, I'm joined by Mr. Ramadan Gobi. He's not a new face here on the show. He is a renowned development economist and lecturer at MOOBS. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Mara. Good morning to our viewers.
Good morning. Next to him is Miss Jane Amuge Okello. She is a wealth management expert and operations director at the Uhuru Institute of Social Development. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning, viewers.
Good morning. Let's start with the big question that every single person has been asking. A lot of information is coming out thanks to this particular probe. Things that were pretty much swept under the carpet and the public did not know for quite a long time. If we're talking about banks that were closed in the 70s, and this is the time that it's coming to light. So someone would ask, what are the effects of this particular probe? Is it a blessing or a curse to Uganda? Mr. Gobi.
Thank you. I think this probe is a good probe. COSASE has done a number of quite good probes. I remember I participated in a conversation about this golden handshake, and it was also a very good probe. The challenge you usually have is the way they deal. I don't know who, maybe the government, with the outcomes of the probe. But so far, I think the probe has helped to bring out a number of issues which Ugandans didn't know, because Bank of Uganda is such a closed institution, held in very high esteem, and also governed in such a way that a lot of information is kept in. Even the people who are working within the bank are not allowed to talk, except the spokesperson of the bank. Now, this probe has brought out a lot of what I would call chaff, which has been ongoing for a number of years. When you look at the way these banks have been closed over the years, from around 1993, Tefe Bank, which actually died. That name Tefe, somebody would think it wouldn't die, up to the latest, the Crane Bank, which was closed. You see that a number of things were done unprofessionally. Okay, these banks were having their own issues also. We don't need to run away from that. Right. Definitely, when you see the caliber or the kind of category of banks which have faced closure and failure, they are mainly those banks which did not have good corporate governance by virtue of their ownership. Right. They were owned by individuals or family or stuff like that, and managed by the same people on their boards and so on.
So it actually helps. And so to speak, what you're saying is that the outcomes are what maybe we need to look out for, whether it will have a positive outcome or negative, so
I'm only worried a bit that the way the probers have been conducting this probe, much as they have brought out a lot of things, they haven't been going deep into interrogating some of the answers they get from the different sides, except maybe BOU side. They have interrogated it well, but the owners of banks, I didn't see deep interrogation of their answers.
Ms. Amuge, what's your take? Of course, we know that the Bank of Uganda really pretty much is independent, and what happens therein is meant to be somewhat, not disclosed and very private, just to ensure that the economic status is balanced, and some of this information pretty much does not affect or bring a turbulent situation in the economy of the country. But what's your take so far? And of course, the unearthing of a lot of information that has been taking place.
First, I want to say that this has been a good opportunity for Ugandans. Sitting in COSASE for 3 days and listening to the testimonies of the people that walked in complaining about how they had called the president, they had tried to approach the governor, they had written all sorts of letters. I remember one of the guys that had an account in Coop Bank came with almost a suitcase of papers showing letters that he had written. You see a desperate population, a people that for a long time doors have been shut towards. And Kosase being there was something like a last resort of, I hope that before I die, something is going to happen. And, you know, it was painful to the point that some MPs were shedding tears. Right. When you see old men that over 20 years down the road, no one has given them an ear. So for me, for the first thing is a space for Ugandans to say something. But generally, the whole argument about Bank of Uganda being a closed institution and therefore for a long time not having an opportunity to be audited, and now things are coming out, I think our country should learn that accountability is a very central thing. Right. If we are going to grow. We cannot have a segment of our institutions not accountable to nobody. Because if there were certain things that we should have learned, maybe in 1993 when Tefe Bank was closed, or when in 99 when Greenland Bank and all these other banks were also got closed, we could have learned certain lessons. Right. And some mistakes probably would not have been repeated. But we didn't have an opportunity to even understand what exactly happened. Correct.
And maybe I'll ask this, Mr. Gobi, and many have been saying that maybe the reason as to why this probe actually took so long is because even the central bank is protected under the Constitution for it to maintain its independence, and no one, maybe, you know, outside parties should not infringe into the operations of the central bank. With this that has been happening and the unraveling of, you know, of course, the negative things that have been happening with the closure and selling off of banks, do you think then the Constitution needs to be changed so that there's a body that is mandated to oversee or mandate the ongoings of the central bank, so to speak, moving forward?
Definitely. Bank of Uganda is a public institution. It is foolhardy for anyone to think that a public institution should be overly, you know, independent, especially independent of accountability and other, you know, transparency requirements of a public institution. Maybe BOU should be autonomous, but not independent.
Absolutely.
By autonomous, we mean it should be protected from political interference. And that's, I think, the wisdom of the people who put this law in the place we are thinking about. But they were so excited that they made it almost accountable to no one. Because the governor, as you have heard, and some of us have been actually teaching these things over the years, and we've been questioning the logic, making an institution which is run by a governor as a governor, and then at the same time is the chair of the board.
Right.
So is he kind of reporting to himself? Has excessive power? And one time actually he said it, that only God can get me out of this chair, when Parliament tried to probe the Basajja Balaba saga. Right. And he was right, because this constitution gave the central bank a lot of independence and the autonomy at the same time. So the time now after this course, and I think it will be one of their recommendations, has come for us to see Bank of Uganda being also policed. It is policing the commercial banks. It has to be policed by someone. And for that matter, the Parliament should maybe regularly look into the conduct of the BOU. Okay. We could be also having, we don't want to have a lot of regulation. I don't think we need another body up there to regulate them, but we need them to report somewhere. We need to see another board, maybe chair, also put up. Okay. Instead of the governor, you know.
So some amends here and there.
There must be some
amendments to the internal leadership.
The authors did a good job, but I think given the time they did it, in early 90s, around 1993, that's when they started working on this law. And BOU had a lot of historic kind of challenges, especially government interfering with it, asking them to print money, asking them not to deal with the certain commercial banks and so on. now it's time for us to go back and revisit this.
Okay, Mr. Muge, and I'll need your honest opinion on this, and also Mr. Ramadan Gobi, I'd seek your response on this as well. Many have been asking, what exactly will be the outcome of this particular probe, number one, especially questioning the issue of corruption and asking how independent are the officials of this COSASE committee, such that they will give us what is right and not what is compromised. Ms. Muge.
COSASE's conversations are going to move to the House. There's going to be open debate on the issues that have come out of COSASE. Now, one of the things we pray that is actually in the right place is that the MPs are as informed as they should be so that they can have meaningful conversation. From the days I've been in COSASE, you almost have a feeling that the MPs do not have as much information as they ought to have so that they can actually give justice to the issues at hand. So in terms of what may happen is, if Parliament gives justice to the conversations around the different bank issues that have been raised, maybe further action would be in the form of, if the issues that are legalistic in manner, they could be taken to courts of law and addressed in the courts of law. But also they could pick areas where Parliament could actually come up with specific regulation to improve on the banking sector. We all want stability.
Right.
And therefore, if a direction is taken to that end, it would be good. But probably before Mr. Ngobi comes in, one of the things I am thinking that would help is the time that COSASE has spent having these interviews, in my opinion, is very limited time. Why? I think there are just so many issues out there as far as the banking sector and people losing so much. If there was a public hearing, you see how the land probe is happening across the country?
Right.
I think the issue on the losses, the compensations that have not happened should take place in a form of a public hearing, so that by the time decisions are taken, we have almost got representation from a vast majority of the population.
Of course, and maybe that will also mitigate the chances of compromise.
Exactly.
Okay. Ramadan Gobi, how independent are the committee members?
You know, in Uganda, when you talk of independence of individuals, you know, in Uganda, rent-seeking and corruption, I think they are the fastest growing economic activities in the country. So I wouldn't be surprised that anyone would not be comfortable with the way some individuals in the committee have been conducting themselves. They are actually, sometimes some have let the cat out of the bag, the way they conduct themselves. You can see that they have been compromised by certain individuals, especially there is a way some people have been, you know, defending certain things, and you question really, is this person independent? But the chair of the committee has tried to steer the committee, at least according to some rules. And at first I was among those who were so scared that, you know, this probe might cause problems for the country, because the central bank is such a sacred kind of institution.
Right.
And I know how politicians behave. I knew also the stakes were so high that money was supposed to cross hands and so on. But thanks to the chair, he has been sober. He has tried to control his members.
Okay.
But again, what is going to really be the outcome is that report. Right. I don't know what is going to be the main content of the report, but as she has said, you know, they have had very limited time, and also they got this politics of going out of the office before they finish the probe. Then they fight between the speaker and the opposition over the change of the committee. All those issues, I think, have affected the outcome of this committee in a way or another.
And of course, we can't have this conversation without having to take a listen at, you know, them that have found themselves in this particular mix. And we have the bites of the former Crane Bank, of course, board chairperson, and also Mr. Amamambazi. Apparently, he did have shares at the National Bank of Commerce. Of course, we'll be getting those bites in a bit. But let's just take a look at the effects of this probe to the banking sector. Of course, people have been trying to say that someone has to regulate commercial banks, especially them that are private. Access to credit is a whole conversation. The young people are saying it's hard for us to afford credit. And the conversation has been, do we take the Kenyan way to cap interest rates, or do we just let it be a free economy, a free market at the end of the day? So what effects will this probe have on the banking sector in terms of regulations? Actually, let's start with you, Madam Amuge.
I think regulation is important, and we should not use the past events of maybe inadequacies from a regulator to water down the importance of regulation. So I think that we should instead streamline the areas where we have inadequacies. But for me, coming from the cooperative segment, I think it's an opportunity actually for we Ugandans to regroup and form local banks. And these local banks can only come from cooperative institutions where people are pulling together their resources. But even these cooperatives will need to be regulated, because the devil in the private sector, I think, is one devil.
Bigger than the one in the public sector?
Yes, no, I think the devil is a common factor all through. Yeah. So whether they're in a private bank or they're in a cooperative owned by so many people, regulation has to happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Gobi.
Yeah, I've always said that, you know, liberalization does not necessarily mean deregulation at the same time. You can have a liberal economy, but well-regulated economy. For years, we've been, some of us who are in this space of economic analysis, we've been really putting it to the Bank of Uganda for having kind of neglected their job of ensuring that this sector, the financial sector, is efficient. We don't mind paying a certain price as long as that price is determined by the true variables of the market.
Right.
The challenge in Uganda is that many of the institutions, not only banks, business entities, health sector, education sector, they were left to perform according to the wishes of their owners or the players within that field. We took it for granted that because we were asked to liberalize, the state has no role whatsoever to play. So this sector of finance is a very critical sector. I remember Bank of Uganda themselves invited Joseph Stiglitz some time back, right. I think 2014. And he came, we went to Munyonyo. And Stiglitz spoke to the heart of every Ugandan, how, you know, banks need regulation, how they can easily engage in what we call predatory lending. You know, a bank predates to its borrowers,
right,
by ensuring that they set the interest rates and terms in such a way that you will fail to pay, and they take your collateral, which in most cases it is higher in value than the loan which people take. Now, when you look at, for example, our interest rates in the country, which is on the mouth of everybody, we liberalized the banking sector in July 1994. That's the last time the government of Uganda stopped capping interest rates, July 1994. To date, when I make my analysis, you look at the lending rate we pay and the savings rate they give us when we save money with them. What we call the interest rate spread, that difference between the lending rate and the savings rate, has more or less remained the same. There hasn't been any change. And banks often, when they have their conferences, this ABC conference and so on, they say, we are the problem, we Ugandans. We are risky, They also the kind of operational costs are high,
Right.
as if nothing has changed since 94 to date. Things have changed.
Right.
Definitely BOU has to do something, has to look into the variables. They may not necessarily cap. I'm not a fan of capping, because in Kenya they also have their own issues with the capping.
They actually want to go back
They
to
want to go
revising
back,
that policy.
because when you cap, what banks do, they go into credit rationing.
Right.
Yeah.
They only give the big guys, and they don't lend SMEs.
So the smaller person will
They
actually
suffer.
Suffers
more
more.
with the capping of
Yeah.
interest rates. Let's take a look at this particular bites. Of course, the board chairperson of the former Crane Bank and also Mr. Amama Mbabazi, he actually did have shares at the National Bank of Commerce. Let's take a look at this.
Of due process and the nature of the sale of Crane Bank assets was suspicious and only done to the prejudice of shareholders. Bank of Uganda therefore handled the takeover management and sale of Crane Bank in an illegal and professional.
Doing what the law requires them to do, they acted in haste, and obviously we did not know why.
First of all, they said they could not have minutes of the sale of National Bank.
I mean, quite a lot of irregularities, and one would ask then what exactly has been happening and how much more don't we know? Mr. Gobi, what's your take on this particular and revelations, and moving forward, what consequences maybe would the Bank of Uganda have to face with regards to this?
I think everywhere there are irregularities. The central bank, we have already seen the governor himself was not in charge of the bank's heading. He didn't have any knowledge whatsoever what was going on. But you know, the governor is not the one who has closed all the banks. So you can see that it's not an individual problem, it's an institutional problem.
Does he allow, though, for the
Because
closure of these banks?
1993, there was a governor. Ntebile was in finance as one of the top officials there. He became governor around the turn of the new millennium.
2002.
Yes. And now you can see that all those banks which were closed that time, they have similarities in the way they were handled with those which were closed after he has come to power. So
Right.
the challenge is not individual, it's an institutional challenge. And I think a lot of corruption also was ongoing in there because of the way institutions were set. That's why, you know, corporate governance is so critical. Just saying that you have an executive director of bank supervision and you give them a lot of power as individuals is really a mistake.
Right.
Similarly, for commercial banks, when you see the type of banks which were closed, they also had similar kind of challenges. Corporate governance, the way they were governing themselves. Of course, they will not tell you when they come to probe that we also diverted money from people's money from this and put it here.
Right.
BOU has to change also its method of eyes on, hands off, and do both.
Okay.
Eyes and hands should be on.
Okay.
Because now these days they just leave banks to make mistakes until they come and close you down.
But what then happens to, of course, the BOU officials who are found on the wrong side of course, the unravelings of this particular probe?
I'm sure the recommendation is going to be clear. Some of those guys should face the law.
But someone
Should
would
account.
ask, is exit of office consequence enough?
No, of course, definitely no. Some people have to go to jail, in my view, if you cause such, a challenge
Losses.
of such a magnitude.
Right.
She has told you how people were, old men lost money. I remember, with the exception of the banks which were closed after 2004, when we revised
regulation.
the Institutions Act, the Financial Institutions Act, those people, the depositors, lost a lot of money for Greenland, for Cooperative Bank, TFA and ICB. They lost a lot of money because these guys used to close and they say everybody go home.
Right.
They don't, reimburse people's money. At least after 2004, they have been closing banks in such a way that somebody takes over liabilities over another and assets,
Okay.
and then the depositor is not affected.
Okay.
That for that I gave BOU the credit.
Exactly, and of course, Mimi was saying that at least at the end of the day, depositors did not lose as much, so to speak. Of course, there were measures here and there
So the
to
law
ensure
of
that they recoup.
2004
Right.
kind of handled some of those issues,
Yeah.
which I think were not handled in the prior period.
Okay, so Ms. Amuge, as we come to a close, of course, we all do agree that even the way the BOU is run, everything with regards to what the law stipulates needs to be revised.
Yeah, you know, yesterday I went with cooperatives as a researcher, and the cooperatives wanted to know which bank BOU had closed, because we were not sure whether we should have been at COSASE.
Right.
So it was interesting to see the Katuntu team in shock that there were 2 cooperative banks. That when BOU was asked, so which bank did you close? They were fidgeting. And so it's confirmed that the real cooperative bank whose assets were sold is actually alive.
Right.
Perhaps was not the one who is supposed to be closed.
So the
Can you
sharing of
imagine?
names of 2 institutions and
It's a
Right.
whole bango.
How
So
can the banks share names?
absolutely, those are the
Exactly.
conversations we had. It's so revealing. It's dirty.
it's dirty.
Yes.
It's dirty. And my question would be, will we then, after this particular probe and the findings as we come to a close, and I'll just need your, snappy answers to this. With this particular probe, and of course with the recommendations coming out, and once we are done and we know the truth, the dart is actually unraveled, people have been worried. Will we maintain the same face? Will BOU maintain the same face in, of course, the international eye? Or will something drastic have to be done so that we can also gain trust again on the central bank?
To me, there must be an overhaul
Okay.
at BOU. That top leadership and also the legal framework in which they operate must be changed.
Okay.
It has been long overdue, actually.
Okay. Mr.
I
Muge.
agree with Mr. Ngobi. There must be a complete overhaul, because it's like there's a syndicate, everybody is doing something because they're told to do things, and then compliance. If you're a regulator, you need to start complying from internally. You don't expect commercial banks to heed to compliance when internally people are closing banks through phone calls. You can imagine the Dar es Salaam branch of Green Bank was closed on a phone call. Really?
Right.
There needs to be change.
Thank you so
the
much for
system.
coming in studios, Miss Jane Amuge Okello. Of course, she is a wealth management expert and operations director at the Uhuru Institute of Social Development. Thank you so much for coming in studios and for your response, of course, and honesty with regards to this particular conversation. Mr. Ramadan Gobi, of course, not a new face on the show, the renowned development economist and lecturer at MOVES. Keep your views coming. Of course, the COSASE probe still continues, and like Mr. Muge put it, a lot of dirt is being unraveled, and as NTV will keep streaming live this particular proceedings. Morning at NTV still continues. You keep sharing your views back in pageant, and of course the hashtag is morning at NTV. Don't go too far. Morning at NTV still continues.
You're watching Morning at NTV.